Solving quadratic equations by factoring when there is a number other than 1, when there's a coefficient in front of the x squared, can be slightly annoying at best and downright miserable at worst. We'll kind of look at both of those circumstances here. We'll start with the mildly annoying. So in the two examples that we see in front of us, we have a number that's in front of the x squared. But we're fortunate that we're going to be able to undistribute that number from the entire problem, and so then we'll just be able to factor it like we did in the previous section. So for example here, everything is divisible by 4. So I'm going to undistribute a 4. So I'm going to put that on the outside of a set of parentheses, and now I have to figure out what goes on the inside of the parentheses in order for us to remultiply by 4 to get back to the original. So 4 times x squared will get me back to 4x squared. 4 times negative 3x would get me back to negative 12x. And then 4 times positive 2 would get me back to positive 8. So here I've undistributed this 4. And now because there's no variable that I undistributed, because it's just a number, I can more or less ignore it the rest of the way. I should keep it in the problem just so that I don't develop a bad habit of just kind of casting aside what may be important information in future circumstances, but really this 4 is not going to play any part to our problem the rest of the way. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to reverse FOIL our remaining trinomial that now just has an x squared instead of a 4x squared. And so hopefully we know that we're going to break that up as x and x into the two sets of parentheses. I'm looking and I see that we're going to be multiplying to make a positive, but we're adding to make a negative. So that means I'm going to need two negatives as my two numbers. The only way I'm going to multiply to make a positive and add to make a negative is if both numbers are negative. And then again, we have a piece of good fortune where there's only one way that we can multiply to make 2, and that's 2 times 1. And that indeed will get us back to our negative 3 that we need to have in the middle. So at this point, we can go ahead and take each of these sets of parentheses and set them equal to 0. Again, the 4 plays no part in this because there's no variable attached to it. So I've got x minus 2 equals 0 and x minus 1 equals 0. In both cases, I'm going to solve these mini equations by just moving the integer piece to the other side. And so the two answers that we get are 2 and 1. In the next example, we see very much the same circumstance, where every single part of the problem is divisible by that number a, the coefficient in front of the x squared. So I'm going to undistribute that as my first order of business. So I take out the 6, and now inside the parentheses I have to figure out what I would need to have, so when I distribute the 6, I get back to my original. So 6 times x squared gets me back to 6x squared. 6 times negative x gets me back to negative 6x. And then if I divide 180 by 6, we're going to get 30. So it's going to be a minus 30. 6 times negative 30 would get us back to negative 180. And so now, again, I'll keep the 6 around there, but it really plays no part because I'm just going to factor the remaining trinomial with just the x squared out front. I'm going to have x as the first piece in each set of parentheses. This time, though, we're multiplying to make a negative, so we're multiplying to make 30, but we have to add to make negative 1. So since we're multiplying to make a negative, we're going to have one positive and one negative here. And then we have to come up with all of the factor pairs that multiply to make 30. So we've got 1 times 30, we've got 2 times 15, we've got 3 times 10, and we've got 5 times 6. Now since one of these numbers is going to be positive and one's going to be negative, essentially we're looking for a pair where we have a difference of 1. So that's going to be our 5 times 6. And because we need, when we add the negative to be larger, since we want to end up with a negative 1x in the middle there, that means it's got to be minus 6 and plus 5. And if we have any doubts, we can always just refoil this and check to see if we end up with this x squared minus x minus 30, which we do. So now that we've gotten this far, we can take each of these sets of parentheses and set them equal to 0. So I can subtract 5 from both sides here. I can add 6 to both sides of the other one, and so we get our two answers. 0 minus 5 is negative 5, and then over here we get 0 plus 6 is positive 6. So again, the nice thing in both of these examples was that we were able to undistribute away that a coefficient. That should always be our first check, is to see if we can undistribute that number, because then we're left with a much easier to factor situation than what we'll see in some of the subsequent examples.